Director Andrew McCabe to federal prosecutors for possible criminal charges. Ed Henry is at the White House with all the developments. Ed, what's going
Mark,
on?
great to see you. This could be a big deal because what we're learning today is that the Deputy Attorney General in an Oval Office meeting last week told President Trump he is not a criminal target in either the Michael Cohen investigation or the special counsel probe involving Robert Mueller, of course. Bloomberg kicked all of this off by reporting that during this meeting, Rosenstein basically said the president's a subject of the Mueller probe, meaning his conduct is under investigation, but there's not enough evidence to charge him. Rosenstein was repeating this for the first time since Cohen's office and home had been raided. And Fox News is specifically hearing Rosenstein also told the president he's not a target of that Cohen investigation in New York either. But Mueller, it's important to note, has not ruled out making the president a target. Great to see you. This could be a big deal because what we're learning today is that the Deputy Attorney General in an Oval Office meeting last week told President Trump he is not a criminal target in either the Michael Cohen investigation or the special counsel probe involving Robert Mueller, of course. Bloomberg kicked all of this off by reporting that during this meeting, Rosenstein basically said the president's a subject of the Mueller probe, meaning his conduct is under investigation, but there's not enough evidence to charge him. Rosenstein was repeating this for the first time since Cohen's office and home had been raided. And Fox News is specifically hearing Rosenstein also told the president he's not a target of that Cohen investigation in New York either. But Mueller, it's important to note, has not ruled out making the president a target at a later date based on evidence that could emerge. The same could happen in the Cohen investigation, which explains why tonight the president has now added to his legal team. You see him there, Rudy Giuliani, the former New York City mayor, former federal prosecutor. He's been sharply critical of the FBI for going light on Hillary Clinton but attacking the president. FBI officials like Andrew McCabe, the former number 2, who was fired for leaking, and now the Inspector General at the Justice Department has sent a criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney here in Washington, saying that McCabe tried to cover all that up by lying to the FBI's own investigators. McCabe says tonight he believes he'll be vindicated, but it's worth noting that former Justice Department officials are telling us that the fact that the Inspector General, who's nonpartisan at the Justice Department, sent this out, this criminal referral, it carries a lot of weight. And that's why the president tweeted a few moments ago that maybe James Comey and Andrew McCabe are getting a dose of their own medicine. Mark?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing news, Ed. Thanks for that. Chris Swecker is the was the executive assistant director of the FBI. He's not one of those who's under criminal referral. And Tom Fitton is the president of Judicial Watch. Tom, this is pretty amazing, isn't it? We basically got a situation where the director of the FBI would be the principal witness in the criminal prosecution of the deputy director, and possibly vice versa in Comey's case. It's bizarre times.
It is, and remember, he's the number 2 at the FBI, or at least was number 2, was the senior official charged with investigating Hillary Clinton over the email matter and targeting President Trump. As far as I'm concerned, his conduct, it's been alleged by the Inspector General, and now he's facing potential prosecution, has tainted both investigations. And remember, Andrew McCabe, ironically, is the FBI official who reportedly set up the ambush interview of those agents with General Flynn, and General Flynn was later charged with lying and admitted to lying to those agents. Now Mr. McCabe is now could be charged with lying at least 3 times under oath to FBI officials investigating him. It's an extraordinary development, and it doesn't augur well, obviously, for Mr. McCabe, Mr. Comey, or frankly, Mr. Mueller, who was handed this investigation by McCabe and his team.
Chris, you wrote today that you're pretty embarrassed about the state of your old agency and what it's come to. I mean, this is the FBI is now the issue. Nobody cares about Russia. That's all gone away. It's actually the conduct of the highest figures in the FBI that is now the issue in this story.
Well, Mark, let me just say it's not the FBI This is what my op-ed was about. It was about not equating the FBI, the good men and women of the FBI, with Comey and McCabe, Schrock, Page, a very small group that was an aberration. Remember, Comey was only director for a very short time.
Right.
I mean, so I hate to have the entire FBI painted with that broad brush when we know that this small inner circle simply made up their own rules and did things their own way and broke the rules, right. Some very well-established rules.
Well, just to go to that, we all know that it's a crime to lie to the FBI, and Michael Flynn supposedly did that, and he would have been looking at several years in jail if they decided to go and prosecute for that. Now, McCabe did it 3 times as often as Michael Flynn. Do you think there's any serious chance he'll be going to jail?
I think that the referral by the Inspector General is a very serious thing. I mean, it's ironic that the potential charge would be 18 U.S. Code 1001, which is lying to the FBI, and that's what Flynn and Papadopoulos and others have been charged with. So I think it's ironic that he's facing those very same charges times 3.
Let's go on to McCabe's old boss, Jim Comey, who's managed to make enemies on all sides, which is boding poorly for his book tour. This was the scene outside a New York City Barnes and Noble, where there were both pro and anti-Trump supporters united on nothing except how much they detest Comey. Antipathy to James Comey is healing this divided nation. What's your reaction to that, Tom?
You know, the veil's been lifted. The veil's been lifted. James Comey is an anti-Trump activist. He might as well be running the DNC, given his hatred for President Trump and his deference to Hillary Clinton. You know, he illegally leaked, in my view, that document about his alleged conversation with President Trump that I really don't even think happened the way he said, in order to get a special counsel appointed. So, you know, breaking the rules to get a special counsel to target President Trump, that's Mr. Comey's legacy. And Andrew McCabe is his legacy. Peter Strzok is his legacy. Right. Lisa Page is his legacy. This is the culture of corruption that James Comey quickly set up when he was appointed by Barack Obama to run and from a leadership position, ruin the FBI for that short time he was there.
Let me ask Chris a question about that, Chris, because you've been very strong on this idea that basically here we have it, like in county court terms, the policeman usurping the role of the county attorney when he absolved Hillary Clinton from any prosecutable wrongdoing. He's not the prosecutor, he's the investigator. Why didn't President Obama actually fire him as FBI director for that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, you know, this system is set up to have a filter between the investigators and a prosecution or a prosecutive decision, and that's a very sound system, and that keeps the FBI out of politics. In this case, he thrust them directly into politics, sort of a thumbs on the scale investigation, a non-investigation with Clinton, and then a pretty push-the-envelope investigation on the president. Right. I'm in favor of an all-out investigation. If you're going to investigate and it's fully predicated, go at it. In this case, they did not. And I think that fit in with the whole agenda there. Lynch clearly, the Attorney General clearly was in the camp for Clinton, was running some interference for her. And that's what former Director Comey cited as the reason he bypassed her. But I can't, you know, you can't do that. You can't do that differently just for her.
Gentlemen,
you know, this is a system that has rules, and he should have followed the rules.
No, that's a good point. Equality before the law. I have dim memories of that. As we reported, there's news tonight that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein told President Trump he's not a target of the Cohen investigation. But there are still questions surrounding both the Cohen and Mueller probes. Christy Setzer is a Democratic strategist and president of New Heights Communications. She joins us. Christy, as we were talking about earlier, the FBI is actually the issue here. If I'd been told by Rosenstein that I wasn't a target of the investigation, I'd laugh and say, no, you got that right. It's you guys who are the target now. It's about corruption at the Department of Justice and the FBI. No?
No, I would say that if this just shows that Rod Rosenstein is no fool. He sees the long trail of people ahead of him who dared to go into the morass of potentially criminal activity that surrounds the president, whether you're Mueller, whether you're Comey before that, whether you're Preet Bharara and Sally Yates, and who have either gotten fired or every single day are looking at the potential of being fired just, again, for daring to say that Trump may have been part of this criminal activity as well. So if I were Rod Rosenstein, I would tell him, you know what, sir, you are not a target. So you think whether or not that's true.
You think this is just like a crafty move by Rosenstein to get himself off the hook and avoid being fired, and then 3 months' time he can supply the articles of impeachment and Trump's finished. That's the master plan, is it?
I think it's possible. I think it's one of two things. Either he's just appeasing him and saying that he's not a target because he doesn't want to get fired and he can live another day. Or two, it's possible that he is not currently a target of the investigation, but that doesn't say that he couldn't be tomorrow, or that he's not a target in the Mueller investigation, but he might be in the Cohen raid or might be in the Stormy Daniels payoff.
That's not true.
There's a lot going on.
He might be a target in 15 years' time when Mueller will just be wrapping this thing up. Let me ask you something, because I think it's a serious point here. We've got James Comey. James Comey is going on a book. He's going on the late night comedy shows, doing jokes about what the prostitutes were up to in allegedly in Trump's Moscow hotel room. Allegedly.
Yes.
At the same time, Michael Flynn has had his life ruined and his savings exhausted, and he's kaput. He's finished. He's over.
He pled guilty.
He pleaded guilty to some phony, baloney, stupid, half-wit process crime that shouldn't really exist. Is it the Democrats' position? Is it your position that it should be a crime to lie to the FBI, but the FBI, like McCabe, should be able to lie to us as often as they want?
Absolutely not. No, I do think that it could be a crime to lie to the FBI, but it's always been a little bit curious to me as far as what exactly was Andrew McCabe's wrongdoing here initially. What was his original sin? They said that he was leaking stuff to the press. Now, again, I have a PR firm. I've worked with the press pretty much every day for the last 20 years. Leaking to the press could also just mean giving truthful information to the press for which there is no crime.
So if you've got a PR firm like you, but if you're supposed to be an impeccable, non-partisan government bureaucrat, that's different from being a hotshot, crackerjack PR person like yourself.
As I am, right? No, it doesn't have to be. That's the thing. Again, there was not necessarily any kind of wrongdoing here on his behalf. The understanding was that he thought that an article was going to come out in, I believe, the Wall Street Journal that was going to make him look bad.
Let's break that down. The wrongdoing may not be the leaking, but then he lied under oath about the leaking. And let's just talk about the leaking, because we had 3 leakers in the New York Times the other day saying not to worry. The 4th guy who's looking at all the Michael Cohen evidence, he's definitely not going to leak. He's the one guy.
But again, those aren't necessarily leakers per se. Those are people who are giving freely of their own free will information to the press. It happens every single day.
Leaking is as leak. There's a whole scale of leaking, from Moscow hotel rooms to the FBI. But it's basically the same quality of material. Here's the question. You talked about criminal wrongdoing that surrounds the president, where is it? Where's the collusion? Where's the Russia? Where's the Russian stuff?
Yeah, so it seems that if you are Mueller, what's been going on is you're sort of creating these concentric circles around the president, right? You're starting with people who are less close to him, but that their guilt is obvious. You know, you're talking about like a George Papadopoulos, a Carter Page,
some guy sitting in a pub in London with the Australian High Commissioner. That's
but who still has
Trump.
that? Fine. And then, as I said, then the concentric circles get closer and closer to him, right? So now we're talking about Michael Cohen, his personal lawyer, who's been with him for decades, who actually does know where all the bodies are buried. And so if I, again, am doing that, that means that, it's about we're knocking on the door for Trump pretty soon.
I'm happy you're optimistic, Christy. Harry Truman used to say that if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. But luckily for Jim Comey, he's getting licked by the puppies in the political media. Why do they adore him so much? That's coming up next on Tucker Carlson Tonight. Stay with us. The former FBI director, Jim Comey, has alienated nearly everyone across the political spectrum, but he still has some big fans, and most of them host TV shows. Take a look.
When I was at the Justice Department, and I think it continues, your character was unassailable, and I consider you a patriot.
Thank you, He interrupted me and denied it in pretty strong terms and asked, I assumed rhetorically, whether he looked like a guy who needed the services of hookers. And then he's tweeted at me probably 50 times. I've been gone for a year. I'm like a breakup he can't get over. He wakes up in the morning. To the truth. Yes, to the truth.
I'm getting sick of Comey's neck. Put a tie on, man. Joe Concha is the media reporter at The Hill. He joins us. Joe's got a tie on. And how long did he... This thing isn't really going well for Comey, is it?
Mark, I'd say it's an unmitigated disaster, quite frankly. You showed the highlights. Those were the highlights. But that was the extent of it. You touched on it a little bit last night. Meghan McCain scolded him pretty good in the interview on The View, which I don't think he saw coming. No. Savannah Guthrie, Today's Show, Friendly Environment. She did a good job as well. Jake Tapper today. Look, it bears repeating this quote again that he said to Colbert, because I can't get over it, where he says, I'm like a breakup he can't get over, President Trump. He wakes up in the morning, I'm out there living my best life. He wakes up in the morning and he tweets at me. A self-awareness gene apparently wasn't planted into Jim Comey's DNA because he just wrote a book that's 300 pages long on the president, and he's gone after his appearance, and he sounds like he's auditioning for the Brenda role in the reboot of Beverly Hills 90210, which can't happen fast enough, by the way.
Right. And he's the one writing about the hands and the eyelids and the hair. And all the rest. He's the one who's still hung up on the boyfriend who dumped him, it sounds.
It seems. And look, I looked at other folks that were top law enforcement officials as well in cable news or on Twitter. John Brennan, former head of the CIA. Phil Mudd, who was FBI and CIA, counterterrorism, now on CNN. James Clapper. And I see vitriol. I see attacks at the president. And people will say, well, but the president attacks them. Yeah, but these guys were law enforcement officials. They're supposed to be apolitical. And now they're trying to sell this narrative that, look, when we were on the job, we never let that get in the way of us doing our job, or we weren't vindictive or weren't vengeful in any way. But now that they're in the public eye, like Comey as well, it's hard to believe that they're actually be able to separate the two and were able to do their jobs effectively without being political. And I think they don't realize it, but they are hurting people that are currently at those bureaus right now because they're showing themselves to be anything but apolitical.
They lend credence to the deep state narrative, don't they? Because there's like this troika of the most powerful figures with the most powerful secret agencies in the United States at their disposal when you talk about Brennan, Clapper and Comey. And the minute they're out of office, they're basically the worst kind of partisan hacks.
It seems that way. And look, with James Comey, he doesn't need the money. He's fine in that department. What he needs is attention. He craves to be relevant. And I think that's why he's doing this. And now it's resembling, really, much like the Hillary Clinton book tour, where that's a public therapy session that we're watching in real time. And it seems like he's going through the same thing. And by the way, the Clinton book tour, I mean, that isn't going well either, right? I mean, Hillary is now down 13 points in approval since the election because this book tour has gone on longer than Cats on Broadway. And the more she speaks, the more it hurts her. And I think the same thing's going to happen with Comey.
Yeah,
Mark.
she's at the Barnes & Noble in Ouagadougou this weekend, if you want to see her there. It's terrific.
Nice place.
I said last night that Jim Comey and Stormy Daniels are kind of merging in my mind into one Comey Daniels. I think the porn star who finds himself hotter than anybody else. But Stormy is actually still out there. What do you make of how Stormy's tour is going?
Well, I think her lawyer is just the most ubiquitous thing on TV right now. And what bothers me so much about Michael Avenatti is that he tweeted out about a month ago that he had a disc. And I actually asked your producers to put together, just to put this up on screen, a disc that he says a picture's worth 1,000 words. He presented it as evidence, and he still doesn't present it. And if I'm a producer, I am not booking him until I get what's on that disc. He can't tease something like that and pull it back, but he is paying the media as well as anybody since President Trump, quite frankly, where if he wants to get booked somewhere, it's one phone call, or they're probably calling him. They put him on the air, but no one's ever pushing him to back up all of his assertions that he's making. And the sketch thing, Mark, by the way, I mean, that I've never seen something ridiculed like that in a long time. I mean, have you seen the resemblances between, I mean, all right, there it is, right? Yeah. I mean, is that, if you're wondering what happened to Cato Kalin since the OJ trial, or Gary from Team America, from the South Park guys? I mean, I think it's Gary, personally.
Look at that's Stormy's husband there, amazingly. Stormy's done a perfect composite sketch of her husband. I wonder how many wives across America could do that. That's brilliant. Thanks a lot, Joe. The left is waging an all-out war on conservative speech. A victim of that crusade is here to talk to us next. It's engaged in an aggressive campaign to silence and intimidate speakers they disagree with. Consider the scene at the City University of New York Law School, where angry left-wing students shouted down a free speech advocate.
Thank you very much to CUNY for having me.
He's not having you. White men and those who support white supremacy.
And then the answer is to change the law.
Why don't you support people? Why don't you support
the law, right? That's a very good thing. You are in law school, right? And it's a bizarre thing to say the law when you're in law school.
Yeah, and when they're not silencing conservatives, they're threatening to attack them. Movie star Robert De Niro calls Trump the lowlife in chief. And in the past, he said this.
This idiot is the president. The guy is a fool. Come on. Of course I want to punch him in the face.
Right. Yes.
Bring it on, baby. Then there's the glee the left expressed online. At the news of Barbara Bush's deaths, Jen Spira, who's a writer for Stephen Colbert, tweeted, R.I.P. Barbara Bush, the only woman who was 92 for 30 years. Professor Randa Jarrah of Fresno State tweeted, Barbara Bush was a generous and smart and amazing racist who, along with her husband, raised a war criminal. F out of here with your nice words. Josh Blackman is the professor you just saw who was shouted down at the law school, and he joins us tonight. Josh, you were giving a speech on free speech, and the position of your opponents is that free speech now is just another example of white supremacy, white privilege, white nationalism, and all the rest of it.
Exactly. I tried to come on campus to talk about free speech, and I was shouted down. They yelled at me, they screamed at me, they called me a fascist, a white supremacist, a Nazi, and they were not interested to hear what I have to say was that free speech is important. The irony is they're protesting free speech by shouting down my speech.
They're also becoming more and more snarlingly inarticulate. I mean, we had law students here paying for an expensive education who are pretty white themselves by comparison with the demographic population outside the doors of their privileged law school. And they're shouting F the law at you. Those of us who have been in American courtrooms always reach that point at a certain stage of the proceedings. But it's odd to find law students doing this, isn't it?
You know, Mark, I feel bad for these students. I can't imagine if they go to court and say, Your Honor, may it please the court, F the law. Right? And in a couple of years, these people might be judges. What is our future? What is our law when these people go on the bench? It petrifies me of what they're learning in class.
Yeah, it's like the next stage after jury nullification. It's like the whole legal fabric nullification. Let me ask you the big picture question here, because you go to a lot of campuses. You're not a white supremacist, you're not a Nazi, you're not a fascist as far as... I'm not going to ask what you were doing in 1933 to 1945. But I sense among people under 50, under 40, certainly by the time you get to students, that free speech has less and less purchase on this generation, and it's simply not a value for many, if not most of them.
You're exactly right. There's a generational shift. People came of age during the 70s and the 60s understand that free speech is important to protest war. But today's generation thinks free speech is a shield for supremacy and a shield for fascism. And they don't understand why free speech is important. And that's why I was there. I wanted to engage them in a discussion. And when I tried to engage them, they filed out of the room. They couldn't handle the truth.
And what's interesting to me is that university administrators and the police forces at their disposal actually often wind up giving the protesters, in effect, a violent form of the heckler's veto. They don't push back, and they don't ensure that you're able to speak.
Exactly. If you watch the video, they were standing inches over my shoulder. They were doing this for 8 or 9 minutes. They were given a warning. There was no discipline. And in fact, the dean of the law school defended these students who said they were engaging in a reasonable protest. Yeah. Mark, this was not a reasonable protest.
You're right. We have to break it there, Josh. Thanks very much. This is a Fox News alert. The text of redacted memos written by former FBI Director James Comey have been sent to 3 separate House committees. The memos were written by Comey just minutes after he met with President-elect Trump. We're going through those memos. Stay tuned. We will have more of that as the evening proceeds. Keep it on Fox. Democrats have a winning strategy. If you can't convince voters, replace them. Should felons, children and illegal immigrants have the right to vote? We'll talk about that next on Tucker Carlson Tonight. The text of redacted memos by former FBI Director James Comey have been sent to 3 separate House committees. The memos were written by Comey just minutes after he met with the president. The great Tammy Bruce joins us to discuss this breaking development. It's a little dicey for Comey at this point, isn't it? He's already revealed these in the book. Now they're actually going official.
Well, look, I mean, this has been the problem, is that nobody has been allowed to see these. He's claimed that since he delivered them when he was a private citizen, it doesn't matter. But the fact is that when it comes to certain reports, that we need to find out if, in fact, some of this was classified information. And now with the McCabe referral for criminal charges, maybe the messaging is important here to people who were doing things before that maybe they thought they wouldn't get caught or it wouldn't matter because they were anticipating a Clinton world. Now they're looking at all of what has happened, and maybe Mr. Comey and others should be very nervous about the fact that they too might have to face the rule of law. So this is very important when it comes to the content, issues of confidentiality, classified information, and whether or not what he told Congress before is accurate. I mean, it's a minefield for him, as it has been for Mr. McCabe as well.
Yeah, the rule of law should apply to our law enforcement agencies. What a concept!
At the very least.
Tammy, yeah. We'll stay with that story if anything else breaks before the top of the hour. But we also want to talk to you about this. The Democrat Party has a new strategy to win elections. Rather than convince existing voters on the issues, they'll just create new voters. That's why we have proposals now to grant the right to vote to felons, to children, and to illegal immigrants. Joining Tammy and me now is Professor Jason Nichols. Jason, what's the thinking behind this? Why should children vote, and why should people who aren't citizens vote?
Well, with children, I would agree. You know, I read about the proposal for Washington, D.C. in particular. Now, this is not a power grab. Washington, D.C. has never been in play for Republicans. 91% went for Hillary Clinton, 4% went for Donald Trump. So this is not a power grab by Democrats. It's not even in play.
No, but even if accepting that it's a one-party state, right? Extending the franchise to minors is if you're saying it's unnecessary, that's fine, but it's a radical move nonetheless, isn't it?
I would agree, particularly with 16, but I would say at 17 with parental consent, you can enlist in the military. Yeah. So I would say perhaps we should have some sort of proposal where you can vote at 17 with parental consent. If we would trust you with the national security of our country, then why can't we trust you to cast a vote?
Well, what about, speaking of the national security, what about people who bust into the country and are illegal immigrants? Voting is a privilege of citizenship and allegiance, or am I just being Mr. Squaresville?
No. Well, I would say, you know, if you're referring particularly to a couple of localities in the state of Maryland, particularly College Park. Obviously, I have an investment in College Park. I think that the first thing is that this is a local matter. This is not about voting for president or governor or anything like that. It's about fixing potholes. It's about removing snow.
Right.
And I think that people who have an investment, a lot of the people, whether they're documented or undocumented, pay taxes in those areas, pay property taxes.
Right.
They have the right to make some of those decisions.
Undocumented
May I chime in
dog
here?
catchers. Yeah, Tabby, go for it.
Yeah, look, the city they didn't actually end up passing that because there was suddenly a concern that the citizenry wasn't able to chime in. But your point, Mark, is key, is that this sets a tone, it sets a precedent, and that it's whether it's like LA and what LA and London do tell you what the left is up to because there's no pushback. But this is about the franchise, about the importance of being a citizen, and I think that that's what the American people are concerned about is where is this road going? And of course you can't have children voting. Their brain literally is not complete.
Developed,
There's a web that doesn't complete until you're about 21. So these are efforts to, in fact, yes, in some cases change the vote or to enfranchise more people because you can't persuade them on the issues. The Democrats are having trouble with that. But it's also to set the precedent that can move through the rest of the country.
You use that quaint phrase, the American people, Tammy. Jason, Bertolt Brecht, in a very famous observation after things went badly in one East German election, he said it's time for the government to elect a new people. This new Rainbow Coalition, all right, because I don't know what it is, people of color, gays, transgendered, whatever, wasn't enough. So we're now importing people to add to the Democrat voting bloc, and we're now extending it down through high school and grade school until there's a permanent majority. Is that the plan? That's the master plan?
I think that of course you're being very hyperbolic there. I think
Really?
number one, when we're talking about what's happening in College Park, again, I think Tammy is absolutely correct that you can't change the charter unless you have 6 out of 7 votes. They have 4, so it's kind of a moot discussion. But there are areas in Maryland where undocumented people who pay taxes, who are participating in those communities, are allowed to vote on a pothole, and I don't think that there's anything necessarily crazy about that. There's a scare tactic that says this is going to come to New York City. This is going to come to LA. It's not happening. We know that's not happening.
Which paragraph of the Constitution has this amazing pothole vote in, Tammy? I'm like a foreigner. Help me get up to speed here, because Jason's attaching huge significance to it.
Well, look, politicians have one idea of what they want, and that is to bring in people or to allow people to have the vote that they think will vote for them. They conveniently forget about the fact that we're the sovereign. And look, speaking of New York, Governor Cuomo says he's going to, with a stroke of his pen, allow 35,000 felons who are on parole, who have not really completed their sentence because they're still in parole, to be able to vote. And he's going to be able to do that by pardoning them. Now, New York already allows... already allows felons to vote after they've served their sentence.
We have to leave it there, Tammy. We'll get to the felons next time. There's no end to them. Thank you for that, Tammy. Thank you, Jason. We'll be right back with more on tonight's breaking news on the Comey memo. Alert, Fox News has obtained a series of memos that former FBI Director James Comey drafted about his interactions with President Trump before and after the inauguration. Fox Business Network's Ed Lawrence has read the memos, and he joins us tonight. Ed.
Exactly, Mark. Yeah, here they are. This is the redacted version of these memos. The unredacted version we're hearing we may get possibly tomorrow. But in these redacted versions, a couple of things jump out at the moment. You see that this outlines 6 conversations that James Comey had with President Donald Trump, some on the phone, some in person. Now, a couple things jump out. Everybody talks about the pledge that the president had asked Comey to follow. Does he pledge a loyalty to him? Well, in the memo, memo, 2 times the president has been outlined as saying that he would like a pledge of loyalty from Comey. But one of those times, Comey actually responded saying, you will get that. So Comey in one of those. Now, another thing that jumps out here is we're talking about the Russian investigation and the FBI investigation with the Russian meddling there. On several occasions, at least 2 we can find, that James Comey documented that President Donald Trump asked him not to, or asked him to get out the information that the president was not a target of that investigation. So as we go through here, very sensitive conversations between the 2. I can tell you that in February of this year, a judge ordered that these memos not be released. They were sent to several committee members today. They had been requested. Both the House and Senate Judiciary, Oversight, and Intelligence Committee got these, along with House Speaker Paul Ryan and Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. So again, in these, a few things jumping out. One, that there was that pledge of loyalty according to Comey, right. But in one of those instances, Comey says you will get that back to the president. The other thing that's in here, I should say, that James Comey sort of tells the president a number of times that Andrew McCabe is an honorable man. The president questioning McCabe's motives on several occasions in meetings, phone calls, and meetings with Comey. But again, Comey reiterating each time that was brought up that McCabe is an honorable man. Also telling the president that the FBI is impartial and doesn't let their feelings get involved in their investigation.
So that's directly related to not just the McCabe referral, but also seems to be at odds with what Comey told George Stephanopoulos on the big ABC interview, Ed, where he said that he didn't give loyalty. He talked about honesty instead. In this version, he pledged his loyalty.
Yeah, maybe it's an oversight, but written in these documents here, it does say in James Comey's own words there that he did say you will get that on at least one occasion when he talked to the president.
Now, Fox News producer Chad Pergram is joining us. He's on the phone. Chad, the lurid bit, the lurid meeting was the one where Comey met with Trump to reveal the existence of this dossier and the more salacious elements of it. Do we learn anything more about that in these memos?
Well, what we have here is there was a part of this memo that was sent to Capitol Hill where Comey says he told the president that the Russians, quote, allegedly had tapes involving him and prostitutes in Moscow around 2013. Now, Comey says that Trump replied, quote, there were no prostitutes, there were never any prostitutes. He said that Trump presumed that the hotels he stayed in were wired. Comey also says that Trump kind of discussed how there were women, quote, who falsely accused him of grabbing them or touching them. He says that there was a stripper, doesn't say anything who this stripper might be, I'll just leave it at that, stripper, and that the president, quote, gave me the sense he was defending himself to me. Now, we're still kind of going through this. I have to say that we heard about elements regarding that from sources on Capitol Hill probably in the spring of last year. Again, the veracity of that is unclear, but that's something that has been rattling around in intelligence circles for quite some time.
But let me just ask you this, Chad, because the whole issue is that there is no evidence of this. It's a story that comes from this dossier. The dossier comes from a foreign national, a British subject, who got it from supposed Russian sources. Does anything Comey says add any credibility to this allegation?
Well, there's one thing here that Comey says in the memo. He indicates that to the president that he was not saying that this was true. That's the exact verbiage here. Only that I wanted him to know that it had been reported and that the reports were in my hands. He said it was important that we not give them the excuse and write that the FBI has the material and that they were keeping it close hold. So this is something where
is a Fox News alert. Fox News has obtained a series of memos that James Comey drafted about his interactions with President Trump. Fox News' Ed Henry joins us. Ed, it's all Comey all the time tonight.
Yeah.
What's in the memos?
Well, Mark, I just got off the phone with a top congressional aide who was going through these as we go through them. I've got all the pages of the Comey memos, 6 or 7 of them, and we're trying to go through it. 2 things jump out. One is that this congressional aide is noting to me, and I'm confirming that on my own by going through this, there is literally nothing new from these Comey memos that have been vaunted as some major break that adds anything to the Russian collusion, any evidence of Russian collusion in their conversations, or anything that suggests obstruction of justice, number one. Number 2, I'm also looking at one of the Comey memos, goes through a dinner we've heard before between new President Trump, late January 2017, and Comey. Bottom line is, Comey in his memo says during the dinner he told the president, "I don't do sneaky things, I don't leak." Comey said to the president, adding that he thinks the FBI gets a lot of the blame, but leaks to the media very little. That is very ironic, given the fact that it is Comey now who's been accused of leaking classified information by the president. And number 2, we're on a day when Andrew McCabe, the former number 2 to Comey, is now facing a criminal referral for leaking and lying, Mark.
So we've now got leaks, Ed, about how these guys don't leak. That's terrific stuff. And no collusion. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in each night at 8 to the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, groupthink.